Hello, my fellow warriors of life. My name's Rollo, Descendant, and recently I went down a YouTube wormhole where I started watching movie review channels like Saberspark or I Hate Everything when I came across The Theorizer. On one of his Corpse Bride videos, I did what I always do, which was to scroll down to the trash heap called the comment section. And I found an outrageous amount of people who are getting into debates about how Victor should have ended up with Emily at the end. Now, years ago, I had watched this movie with a friend of mine who hadn't seen it before, and he expressed the same sentiments as many of these comments do. And honestly, I was quite baffled, because this is what people were thinking. Victor should be with Emily! She deserved to find happiness! And can I just say, what is wrong with all of you? Let's not forget that she is literally a corpse! If you were in Victor's shoes, I guarantee you wouldn't want to get romantically invested in a corpse. And don't forget, this is animation. She looks pretty because it's movie magic. Victor, like a normal human being, acts repulsed and frightened because, let me tell you, rotting flesh with maggots eating it is not pleasant to look at. Before I get into spoiler territory, I recommend you go watch this movie before finishing the video because, why would you not watch it? Let's first try to understand why so many people would be on the Victor and Emily ship. Aside from possibly being a necrophiliac, let's talk about how the way the film presents the romance is odd in comparison to other romantic interests in movies. If there are two romantic interests, you can pretty much guarantee that the protagonist will fall in love and end up with the person they spend the most time with on screen. Writers do this because the audience ends up falling for the person who has the most screen time by the end. This just psychologically makes sense. In real life, you would logically pick the person you've shared more experiences with because you trust them more. So, in any film with two possible love interests, you pretty much know the protagonist will pick the person they've shared the on-screen journey with. You see this in Enchanted when Giselle picks Robert, even though off-screen, Robert logically would have still married Nancy due to the 2 years of dating. Since Giselle spends most of the whole movie with Robert, we wouldn't feel satisfied if she still married Edward. Another example is, Frozen. Anna gets engaged to Hans, but you know she won't end up with him since she goes on her journey with Kristoff. I remember when I first saw it in theaters, I was sitting in the seat wondering, how will they resolve this love triangle? Will Hans end up with Elsa? Will he become an ally against Wesselton over there? Oh. So this is why, movie-wise, The Corpse Bride is a little odd. We get very little screen time of Victoria, and even more time on Emily. She even gets a whole song where she laments about her broken dreams. More on that later. Yet, after all this screen time with Emily, Victor still ends up with Victoria. Advocates for the Emily ship also feel immense pity for her death. She wanted to elope with Lord Barkis when she was alive, but he killed her. She was young and lost the chance to live her idealized dreams. People want something good to happen for her. But it does, she lets go and is able to move on to the true heaven. So I think this movie is absolutely brilliant and everything happens the way it should, despite the approach for formatting. The story begins with Victor's family singing about he will marry into money, which was pretty much the goal for your children in those days.
Our son will be married. According to our family carrier, elevated to the heights of society.
This is clearly illustrated in Victoria's conversation with her parents about love.
Oh, Hildegard, what if Victor and I don't like each other?
As if that has anything to do with marriage. Do you suppose your father and I like each other?
Surely you must, a little.
Of course not.
Of course not. All that matters is appearances and wealth in regard to marriage. But when we look at Victor, he does not sing along with them, since he's in a different location, but draws a butterfly and looks mournfully into space, wishing he could have the freedom to choose. We get a sense that his parents aren't pleased that he ever made anything more of himself. His only future will be to take over the family business, which is to sell fish at the market. So they aren't poor, but not necessarily high on the totem pole in respectable society. Victor, additionally, does not have the approval of his future bride's parents either. During their singposition, they lament their daughter's union to Victor, because he's the son of the fish-selling business owner. Despite their appearance of wealth, the family has no other choice but to marry her to someone of lower class to prevent being sent to the poorhouse. Why is this important, you ask? It's significant because there is no one in Victor's life who loves him for him. He's trapped by society's expectations of him and is merely a pawn for financial transactions. That is what makes his meeting with Victoria so special. While the two sets of parents move into another room for tea, Victor takes notice of a piano and sits down to play. He pours emotion into his song, which draws Victoria from her bedroom completely enchanted. Now, we must take notice of the flower in a vase on the piano. This is the most important symbol used throughout the movie to signify Victor and Victoria's relationship. The first thing to notice about the flower is that it has a white color. The white flower is pure and light, just like the intent Victoria has toward Victor. She doesn't want money or status. All she wants is love and a true relationship. Victor's glum life is shown to have little color. Everything is sepia, almost black and white. This creates a rather dark and gloomy atmosphere. The color of the flower is critical. It tells us that Victoria is the first person to bring light into his life. She spooks him, but then remarks on his beautiful piano-playing skills and comments on how her mother never allowed her to, since respectable women don't play. Only in this universe, though, what the heck, man. Victor likely has never been respected or taken seriously for his artistic and musical talent, so this would be a big deal to him to have someone genuinely compliment and love his work. Victoria also feels a spark of love ignite because he brings her hope that she can be whoever she wants to be. This initial meeting, in short, was the first time that they can be themselves. Victor literally has to wait until he hears the door shut in the beginning of the scene to feel safe enough to play his music. To have it validated would change everything for him. This scene is so poetic and well thought out that it is genuinely one of my favorite meet-cutes of all time. Victor is nervous and overly formal with her, but Victoria asks he call her by her first name since they are getting married after all. Victoria also confesses how she always dreamed of her wedding day from the time she was a girl.
Since I was a child, I've dreamt of my wedding day. I always hoped to find someone I was deeply in love with. Someone to spend the rest of my life with.
This is her first hint that she hopes that they fall in love. She doesn't want to seem overeager and says,
Silly, isn't it?
Victor passively says,
Yes, silly.
before realizing what he said, and jolts forward to insist that he didn't mean that, and in turn accidentally knocks over the flower. I believe he's already fallen for her in this short interaction. He wants to believe in having a love-filled relationship. Victoria picks up the flower and gives it to Victor. For the rest of the time the flower appears in the film, it is at key moments to signify their new love. The first moment is when Victor runs into the forest to practice his ceremonial marriage vows after flubbing them all day and embarrassing himself in front of everyone.
Oh, Victoria. She must think I'm such a fool. This day couldn't get any worse.
He tries to remember the lines while he walks dejectedly through the woods, still failing, his confidence wavering even more.
With this hand, I will cut your... Oh, goodness, no.
Sorry, I had to add that. He sits down in defeat, pulls out the flower, looks at it feeling like he has let down Victoria. But then he smells it and gains a resurgence of confidence. He's not learning the vows to impress the people who only care about his financial role in the marriage. He only wants to learn the vows because he wants to marry Victoria. After realizing his conscious want, he is able to recite the lines perfectly. He gained strength from the flower because it represents the first person who loves him for him. I'll tell you about the second time the flower appears, but to keep things less confusing, I'll talk about it further along in the story. So at this point, Victor places the ring on a tree branch, which of all the astronomical odds is actually the finger of a hand of a skeleton of a person who is waiting for someone to do that. Emily. In comparison to Victor's meet cute with Victoria, we have the exact opposite. He runs in terror away from the zombie, who corners him and kisses him, which makes him pass out. Understandably. When he wakes up, he finds himself in the land of the dead, which is full to bursting with color compared to the land of the living. It is more exciting and enticing than his dull life, but he now has the motivation to live because of Victoria. Again, he is still alive, so he would naturally be repulsed and not want to live there. Emily clings to him and constantly says how he's her husband.
He's not my boyfriend, he's my husband. I'm his wife.
And parades him around like a trophy. Victor tricks her into finding a way back up to the land of the living to visit Victoria in private, so he can confess his feelings he realized he had for her in the woods.
Victoria.
Victor, I'm so happy to see you.
Victoria. I confess. This morning, I was terrified of marriage. But then, on meeting you, I felt I should be with you always, and that our wedding could not come soon enough.
His confession, it's just so beautiful. Ah! Emily catches him and becomes distraught that he was, well, in her opinion, cheating on her. Victor has no feelings for her and he says,
Why can't you understand? It was a mistake. I would never marry you.
The word would is key. He doesn't even see them as married because there was no marriage. Victor sees he hurt Emily's feelings and reconciles with her through a piano duet because he feels bad for her. This is not out of love, but more so pity. To understand further why I am vehemently against the Emily and Victor ship, we must examine Emily's motivations. The reality is that Emily is not in love with Victor.
I love you.
She's in love with the idea of marriage. Victor learns from the other dead folks in the pub about Emily's death. What we find out is that when Emily was alive, she met a guy who said he wanted to elope and asked her to bring her family's wealth. He attacked her brutally, took the money, and left her for dead. We later learned that this was Lord Barkis, and considering his quick marriage to Victoria, we can assume he used similar sly words to trick Emily. Now, Victoria is already in love with Victor and is against the new marriage, but her parents see it as a win.
Perhaps in disappointment we are perfectly matched.
Barkis is mature, well-spoken, respectable, and appears wealthy, which couldn't be any more different than Victor, who has recently shamed both families by becoming town gossip after last being seen with another woman before disappearing. All the same, Victoria asks her parents to give Victor more time to redeem himself. Emily's story will require some assumptions, but further shows how different she is from Victoria, except for the same core wish, to have true love. But Emily clearly went about it the wrong way. She likely didn't take the time to get to know Lord Barkis and was going against her parents' wishes. She's in love with the idea of love and marriage, but her naivety is what got her killed. Emily's background of eloping with someone she likely didn't know well tells us that she is enchanted with the idea of marriage. We can actually assume that she had the same longing of freedom from society that Victor wants, because of the butterflies she turns to in at the end. The same exact type of butterfly Victor is drawing at the beginning of the film, and releases, which in turn symbolizes freedom. There are a lot of instances that give me a vibe that Emily loves the idea of love and marriage, and not necessarily Victor. For instance, their meet-cute scene is horrifying to him, and he literally has to accidentally himself upon her. It wouldn't have mattered who found her, she would have claimed them as her own. We get scenes of her dancing around in her wedding dress. Emily's basking in the idea of being a beautiful bride in the beautiful dress. She shows him off to everyone in a pub, not allowing him to get his bearings of an underground, before introducing him to it. But the greatest indication to me is that she truly doesn't love him is that she has no consideration for his feelings and acts selfishly. Emily doesn't wait for his consent to marriage. She drags him to the underworld. She tries to win him over with a wedding gift. When Victor tricks her so that he can see Victoria, Emily is furious upon finding out and doesn't even think about how he still has a life. She sings a tragic song that makes assumptions about
Little Miss Living.
The song ignores Victor entirely and is focused on her own feelings.
The vows are binding only until death do you part.
What are you saying?
Death has already parted you.
If he finds out, he'll leave.
She finds out that the marriage was null and void to begin with, and that in order for it to become real, Victor would have to die.
I could never ask him.
She says, not because she's thinking about his feelings, she's just thinking about how he has said they would never work out. So when he consents to it, you see no moments of Emily asking whether he's sure about it or not. She immediately gets all the dead folk excited for the wedding. It takes her until right before the climax to see past her own delusions by looking at Victoria in her own wedding dress, for Emily to realize that she's being selfish. By seeing how her actions are repeating her own tragic fate onto someone else, Emily finally understands that she is unfairly destroying the dreams of someone else. Yes, Emily died unfairly, but she doesn't deserve to prevent two people who are genuinely in love from marrying each other. Now, don't get angry. Understand that I really like Emily. I actually believe that she follows traditional lore around the undead, where injustices or intense attachments prevent them from moving on to true heaven. All the dead people we see have some kind of unfinished business on Earth. It can't possibly be true heaven because the world is physically underneath the town. All the dead people seem to have connections to the town, except for maybe Napoleon, and they're trapped in their rotting bodies. Emily's realization that she will never be able to be a true bride on Earth allows her to finally accept her fate, which is why she dissipates into butterflies and is finally free to move on. So we've looked at Emily's motivations. Victor's motivations are important too. His only goal is to return home so he can marry Victoria. Why does he decide to give up and allow himself to die and marry Emily? That's pretty drastic if you ask me. Well, Victor finds out that Victoria is being wed to someone else.
But how could she?
Victor is seriously devastated by this. This is when we see the flower again. Victor examines it solemnly and then drops it to the ground. His love and hope for Victoria is crushed. He already felt trapped, and now he'll be ostracized from respectable society from the shame he's brought from the scandal with Emily. So when he overhears the plot to kill him, he tells Emily she doesn't have to ask him. He's got no reason to live anymore, so he can at least try to find happiness with her. Now let's look at Victoria. As I've mentioned before, we don't get a lot of time with her, but boy do they make every second count. She has just as much personality as Emily, but a lot of love for Victor. She dreams about true love and is horrified to discover the new arrangement to Barkis. Victoria can't escape the new marriage and looks sadly into the mirror while the nurse tries to lift her spirits up. Victoria has already shown how she wants to marry Victor. She approaches him at the piano as good as telling him that even though the marriage is arranged, they can still find love. Later at the wedding practice, we get a little moment where she lights Victor's candles with hers, sneakily because he was struggling and Victoria wants him to be successful. Aw, she keeps glancing at him. Gosh, she's adorable. After seeing a corpse spiriting her fiancé away, Victoria sneaks out to find answers because she wants to save him. She knows she'll sound crazy, but she has to try. These are completely selfless acts, which is a stark contrast to Emily. This is why the ending is so satisfying to me. The writing, the symbolism, and everything about this movie carefully crafts this beautiful love story between the two. The love triangle is not even a triangle because there is no love between Victor and Emily, even though they have their moments. I'm so sad that this has somehow flown over people's heads, but I guess the fan base is generally people who like the spooky themed movies in life and will be the die-hard fans of supernatural characters. You may continue to ship whomever you want. I know this video essay is pretty rambly, but I hope you enjoyed nonetheless. I could gush all day about this masterpiece of a movie, but there are plenty of videos that have done that already. I'm Rollo Descendant, and thanks for joining me on this adventure. But it's time for you to find your own.